Hello and welcome to my little review slash discussion of Spirited Away. I wanted to give a quick spoiler warning. I'm going to be spoiling Spirited Away, but I'm also going to be discussing some spoilers for Howl's Moving Castle. If you haven't seen my video on that yet, feel free to check that out. That was sort of my first Studio Ghibli movie, and this is now my second, so I'm going to naturally want to compare the two. But a little warning aside, I think we can jump right into it. All right, Spirited Away, where to start? So I wanted to say that in comparison to Howl's Moving Castle, because again, this is sort of my first exposure to Studio Ghibli films, I feel like I enjoyed this one more overall, although I still enjoyed the aesthetics of Howl a little bit more. I feel like Howl's Moving Castle, the landscapes are really gorgeous, and it in general is just a bit more of a, I won't say colorful because this one isn't extremely colorful, but I guess like more of a brighter film, because a lot of this film takes place in sort of a scary slash surreal spirit world, while Howl's is, despite having some war scenes, is in this very gorgeous pastoral environment that has this sort of interesting like 19th century influence with some of the military uniforms, etc. But plot-wise, I think I probably enjoyed this one more, only because it also had like a lot less plot holes. That being said, I do feel like this one has some plot holes that I want to cover, but I just felt like Howl's, it really just sort of wraps up out of nowhere, and it doesn't fully make sense how everything gets totally solved and cured. It sort of just happens, and then the war's over, and the prince is found, and everything just works out really easily. While in this one, it's a bit more of an interesting, fight by the protagonist to sort of get everything to be good again and get home, etc. And I really appreciate that. But this is sort of an interesting movie because in the first, I won't even say half, but I'd probably say the first quarter of it, I feel like it's intentionally like a kind of funky nightmare. When I was watching this, because I guess full disclosure, this is my first full-time watching the whole movie, beginning, middle, and end all together in one sitting. But I feel like I'd seen little snippets and clips of this on TV as a kid. It would occasionally be on, but as those of you who were there would know, back then, you couldn't rewind or stream things. It was just you turned on your TV, and wherever the movie or show happened to be is where you started watching, and you would just piece it together from there. So I feel like I'd seen a couple scenes from this, notably the whole no-face monster, but I didn't know the plot because, again, also this had been when I was like a super young child, so childhood memories fade quickly. But it was interesting watching this because I kept seeing moments where I'm like, that would have traumatized me as a kid for sure. There's like this weird scene where this frog friend sees the two main characters, and he gets put into this weird bubble and then like levitates, and he sort of looks like he's dead for a moment. And it's just like super eerie stuff. And then she has to go down like this large set of stairs, and it looks like she's afraid that she's gonna fall because it's super high up. And I feel like weird things like that show up a lot in dreams, like endless staircases and like kind of a fear of heights. And I feel like I can say that confidently because a lot of like dreamcore art where people try to like make 3D dreamscapes, or like pool core and all that sort of like liminal space stuff, back rooms, etc. They all usually play with like climbing up a ladder above a really high space, and the character keeps falling, and then they get, teleported into an even creepier part of the world. And with the liminal spaces, a big thing is the fear of, they look down and they see it looks like an infinite black hole that just keeps going and going and going, and it's the fear of falling down that. And so I feel like the first quarter of this movie like really taps into some like weird dream horror, and our parents become pigs, and it's that feeling of being suddenly alone in this sort of like creepy abandoned space, and your parents are also acting really uncanny, very uncanny. So, in a way, that first quarter is almost not enjoyable, but it's enjoyable like horror movies can be enjoyable. And then it actually kind of gets kind of cozy, where she's working and she sort of becomes, I'm going to say it's the second quarter of the film, but it's also sort of like, then halfway point. But she sort of makes a couple friends with the workers, and also has moments where she sort of, pleases the sort of evil witch and gets everyone gold, and everyone celebrates her. And there's some interesting stuff where it actually felt oddly kind of cozy imagining working at this weird bathhouse, because also it's like such interesting and unique spirits and personalities come in to be clientele. But I felt like the movie really shined, during that, the last half, especially where she gets on the train, and then because at that point, like, she has her cute little buddies, which is like the mouse / giant baby and the bird that is now like, I don't know if it's like a tinier bird or a fly, but she has them, and the different workers are much nicer to her, and she also has No Face as like kind of a weird friend, and she goes there, and it quickly ends after that, unfortunately, where then she remembers everything, and helps her friend get his name back, and then gets to go back home after the big final test. So but I felt like that's where it got where I really started to actually like the movie. While the first part, I felt like some of the parts at the bathhouse kind of dragged, but it kind of needed to drag, because that's the whole thing. Like, she sort of was spirited away and is in this sort of liminal spirit world, and time doesn't seem to exist, because at the end of the movie, they go and find the car, and there's like dust in the seats, and it's not quite clear how long they were in the whole spirit world, but like time has passed in the real world while they were gone. So that being said, some of the weird like plot holes I kind of wanted to cover is like, what was like the evil sister witch? What was her actual like main game plan? Because she clearly had like these missions that she was having the dragon go on, and he was getting the golden seal, but before that he was doing other missions and recon, and in general, like, what is she getting out of enslaving everyone at this bathhouse and making them work? It seemed like she was like, I thought it was going to be revealed that someone else was the real owner of the bathhouse, like maybe it was the dragon boy, and she had tricked him to take over the bathhouse and take all the money. But it seems like this is just like actually her bathhouse, and the work she does is actually like pretty noble in a way, in that she is helping spirits sort of like restore themselves before they move on. And for example, when there's this river spirit or stream spirit that comes in, and it's like filthy and dirty, and it has all this like pollution from the real world in it, the seemingly evil witch also is like super enthusiastic about working with everyone to help it and to remove all of the pollution, and that's before she knows that it's rich, and that she genuinely seems happy when he's like basically cured. So there's this weird thing where she turns some people into pigs and steals people's names, but then it's just sort of to run this bathhouse that seems to be doing good work. And like I said, she has the boy dragon do these weird operations and missions and kind of scheming. And also, for example, multiple points in the movie, she like puts on this like cape that lets her use like bird wings and fly, and she flies off, and again it's implied that she's like off doing something like nefarious, but nothing in the movie actually reveals what that is. So like what was her whole deal, to be honest? Because also at the end of the movie she does willingly let the girl go with her parents, and it's sort of implied that the only reason she does the test is that that's sort of like ceremony, because her like baby says like, you better not be mean to her, and she says, I can't help it, I have to do the test, it's just sort of like that's the custom, I have to do it. And then she lets her go, and the little girl even thanks her and calls her grandma as well and says thanks for everything. And so the girl doesn't even seem to see her as being a huge villain. And also, like, for example, the thing that actually hurt the dragon boy isn't the evil sister witch, but it's all those like paper origami things that were flying after, the paper puppets or dolls that were chasing after him, as and sort of also who ended up being the nice sister, which is technically the one who got him all bloodied and wounded. So you can't even be mad at the bathhouse witch for that. So I just felt like that part was sort of weird. And then the only other like quote unquote complaint I really have is that I felt like there were a couple moments where the emotions of the protagonist and sort of her growth didn't quite make sense, because in the beginning she's terrified, everything's scary, and then out of nowhere she seems to just sort of like understand No Face, and she knows that something about the bathhouse makes him go crazy, and she's like, when he's eating everybody including some of her friends, she's like super calm about it, and it's just like, hey, you got to stop this, I need you to leave, even though she was terrified of everything else. So her sort of like sudden bravery in that moment feels a little weird, especially since it's not directly related to the dragon boy and her sort of love for him and stuff like that. And in general, as we've discussed before on this channel, there's usually sort of a Freytag's pyramid with stories where we see, an introduction, an inciting incident, a rising action, a climax, and then a resolution. And while this plot has that, there's usually also throughout this sort of another arc, which is, character growth. So maybe you have a character who's like really selfish in the beginning, or they're a coward, and then by the end of it, they are, no longer selfish, and they've learned that they need to rely on their friends or something like that. In this one, because at best you could say, well, she was more afraid of the spirit world in the beginning, but it was a reasonable fear because she didn't really seem afraid of anything else. I think anyone would be afraid if they got suddenly spirited away. And then by the end, she's sort of brave, but I didn't feel like she like grew in the sense of, normally with these stories you see it's like, oh, being spirited away was a very like tough and arduous journey for her, but it was ultimately one that she needed because she actually had to overcome some like personal problems. But she didn't really have that. And also, like, at the end, her parents are still kind of mean, but it's not like she's like had a bad relationship with her parents in the beginning, because sort of like before they went into the tunnel, everything seemed fine. And, her dad seemed nice, and then he just kind of got weird about the food. So it's not like, oh, well, she needed to have a second found family so she could continue living with her, parents who are jerks, like as if it's like a Harry Potter scenario of like him with found family at Hogwarts versus, the Dursleys that he lives with. So that felt sort of weird because I almost felt like there was something sort of unsatisfying about not quite seeing character growth in that. It really just felt like a character just went through a really weird experience and then left pretty much the same. That being said, I also feel like, to be a little bit of a hater with Studio Ghibli films, I feel like one of the biggest things about these films is the music. And I feel like obviously people love the music, but I feel like they almost understate just how important the music is to these films, because I feel like anytime I actually felt any sort of like real emotion in this movie, it was always during one of the most gorgeous performances, you know, you've ever heard with the music. It's like, it always sounds like it's like a full orchestra is playing, and it's just phenomenal music. And I would almost say like the music is better than the animation in terms of also like making you feel things and feel the emotion, because that's what really, like, it's the motifs and, you know, the melodies coming back that were played earlier now are played in a more dramatic way. And this happened with Howls too. And like, for example, when the Dragon Boy returns to the nicer witch's lady's house and, you know, she opens the door and sees him, it's the music that starts swelling and is like, you know, again, just like so heightened in emotion that really, I feel like if you removed the music, I feel like this movie would lose a lot of its magic and charm. Not all of it though, mind you, because for example, the environment design and all of the art has so much magic, like the whole weird bathhouse and the architecture and the weird sort of like town where the parents like ate too much food and all of that, and also like the character design of the different spirits and creatures and whatnot are all really, really cool and captivating, and you know, it's really cool world building in that sense where I want to see more. So again, I'm not by any means like criticizing the animation. I'm just trying to acknowledge how good the music is, because I feel like it takes it to a whole nother level. And you know, sort of like, you know, even like with Star Wars, without John Williams, you know, some of the scenes wouldn't be nearly as iconic as they are. You know, like the scene when Luke is looking at the two, I think, suns or moons of Tatooine. That scene hits so hard because of the music. So again, I know the music's beloved for this, but I just wanted to, you know, point out that I feel like it's doing a lot of lifting at some parts for the actual emotion of the movie rather than just the aesthetic beauty of the animation. That being said, to, you know, talk about the animation, I do feel like this film had a bit more artistry than Howl's Moving Castle. With Howl's Moving Castle, I felt like there were a couple scenes where it kind of, you know, because like when you're watching an animated movie, you know, it's all animated, so every frame is technically art, but there's usually a couple moments where I feel like they crank up the artistry as sort of like a flex moment or like a very significant moment, and that feels like, wow, that's like, you know, an extremely powerful moment, or like, what a cool animation, how did they do that, what an interesting shot, wow, you couldn't do that in live action, it's so cool that they were able to do that, you know, in this drawn style, etc. I felt like Howl's Moving Castle only had a couple scenes in it that I felt like really felt like those, you know, like larger than life animation moments. You know, in Howl's, I'm thinking of the moment when she's like going through the door and there's this scene where she's like sort of walking on sunlight as she's sort of figuring out how to cure Howl and everything. That was a gorgeous, amazing moment. But in this movie, I felt like there were like a lot more moments, and also like I felt like the animation was more fluid with her running and everything, but there were these cool shots where she's moving through sort of a maze of flowers to go to the pin where her parents in pig form are being kept, and when she's, you know, flying on the dragon's back and remembering when she's like sort of drowning in a river, that was really cool. And some of the spirit stuff, like when the face of the old like stream spirit sort of emerges from the water after being cleaned of all the pollution, like there was just like so many iconic moments and like quote unquote shots that I'll be thinking of for like a really long time. So in that sense, I think I do like this one a bit more. Also, I just like sort of Halloween-y stuff. I felt like this was a fun one to watch in October, thus my Halloween costume that I'm wearing. But yeah, that being said, I wanted to keep this a bit shorter than my normal video, so I think I'll wrap that up here. But, thanks for checking this out, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.